My true story from Vermont. I raised him alone, but he said, "This isn't your home anymore." Right after his wedding. "No offense, but you kind of bring the mood down. Maybe skip the reception?" That is what my son said to me on the most important day of his life, and unbeknownst to me at the time, the most heartbreaking of mine. I stood there at the edge of the venue, under a string of fake twinkling lights and rented elegance, in the shadow of everything I had once sacrificed to help him reach this moment. He could not even look me in the eye. His voice was calm, casual, as if he were simply commenting on the weather. "Don't play the martyr, Mom. This is our fresh start. We need space from your drama." I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out. What could I say? I had not brought drama. I had brought the very dress I sewed with my own hands. I had brought the memory of lullabies, of scraped knees and midnight coughs. I had brought the presence of the only parent who never left. But apparently that was too much. "You raised me, sure, but I'm not paying for your pity parade." He turned to leave. Not a hug, not a thank you, not even a nod. The woman he was marrying lingered just long enough to glance at my handmade dress and offer her own kind of parting gift. "Why does she dress like a sad poem?" That was the phrase that stuck in my mind, repeating itself as I made my way down the corridor toward the reception area. I found my name printed in tight little font on a folded place card. Table 14. It was placed beside a mop closet and across from the kitchen doors that swung with every passing server. The other guests at the table were strangers, elderly, mostly alone. We smiled politely at each other, but no one spoke much. It was not a table for celebration. It was a table for storage. I sat quietly. My hands rested on the dark green fabric of my dress. I had sewn it from memory. The color matched the first blanket I ever wrapped around him as a baby. Forest green, soft and warm. I thought maybe it would make him remember. Instead, it made him cringe. The music began. The announcements were loud and dramatic. His new family, her parents, her uncles, her college friends, were introduced like royalty. His father's name was mentioned, though the man had left when our son was 5. I, who had stayed, who had worked 3 jobs to keep him warm, was not mentioned at all. When the entrees arrived, mine was cold. I did not complain. I simply moved the food around the plate and watched the happy couple dance their first dance to a song I had once hummed to him as a child. I smiled politely when guests passed. I even waved when the photographer hovered near our table, though he never took a picture. Who would want a photo of the forgotten ones? The clinking of glasses, the laughter, the speeches, none of it reached me. I was in a bubble of silence, remembering how I used to hold him when he had nightmares, how he would cling to my shirt, beg me not to leave the room. I never did. I stayed until he fell asleep every single time. Now, I was the one left in the dark. When I rose to use the restroom, a young server rushed over. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Guests aren't allowed in this corridor during the reception." I explained, gently, that I was heading to the restroom, but her eyes darted toward my table. She saw my place card and said, "Oh, sorry, I thought..." Never mind. She thought I was staff. I suppose my dress and posture invited that mistake. I returned to table 14. The others were quiet, sipping water, avoiding eye contact. One of them, an elderly man with a cane, nodded at me. That was the only acknowledgement I received all evening. When the bouquet was thrown, I did not rise. When they cut the cake, I stayed seated. When the mother-son dance was announced, my name was not called. Instead, his new mother-in-law danced with him. She wore pearls and a designer dress. He laughed as he spun her. My breath caught, but I did not cry. Not there, not yet. It was around then that I stood. No one noticed. I walked slowly, deliberately across the floor. The music was loud, the lights warm, the people too distracted to see me leaving. Outside, the night had turned cold. Vermont in October always did. The wind bit at my cheeks as I pulled my coat tighter. It was old, woolen, and smelled faintly of lavender from my closet drawer. I walked across the parking lot, past the rows of shiny cars. Mine was at the far end, next to the dumpster. That seemed fitting. Halfway there, I paused. I turned to look back. Through the window, I could see him. My son, laughing, spinning his new wife. He looked happy. He looked free. He looked like someone who had never needed me. I took a deep breath, the kind you take when you realize something has shifted permanently. I reached my car, opened the door, sat inside. My hands trembled slightly as I turned the key. The engine started. A puff of white breath escaped my mouth in the cold air. I sat there, just for a moment, listening to the hum of the motor, the silence around me, the distant music muffled by the walls between us. Then I pulled away. No one ran after me. No one called my name. No one even knew I had gone. And that, perhaps, was the loudest goodbye I had ever received. They say motherhood is a quiet kind of heroism. No parades, no medals, just the daily choosing of someone else's needs above your own. If that is true, then I was a soldier in an invisible war. And for 25 years, I never laid down my arms. After my husband died in that highway crash, I had no plan, no backup, no inheritance, and no one to call. Just a toddler with wide eyes and no idea that the man who used to lift him high above his head was never coming home again. I remember that first night alone. I sat on the edge of our bed, with my hands in my lap, still smelling the coffee he brewed that morning. I did not sleep. I just watched our son breathe. I took 3 jobs. Not all at once in the beginning, but soon enough. I worked at the local library during the day, shelving books and smiling at strangers while trying not to think about how my hands ached. At night, I cleaned the town high school, pushing a mop bucket across sticky linoleum floors until my knees went numb. And between shifts, I embroidered names on towels and napkins and infant blankets for the dry cleaner's side business. I learned to thread a needle with swollen fingers. I learned to sew through grief. Our house was old and cold, a Vermont rental that had not seen a proper furnace in decades. We had 1 space heater, and I kept it in his room. I would sleep on the couch near the kitchen, bundled in 2 coats and 3 blankets, but I made sure his room was warm. I fed him oatmeal when there was nothing else. I made up stories to turn our poverty into adventure. "We're camping tonight," I'd say, lighting a candle when the power was out. "We're explorers." The green blanket, his favorite, was made from an old army coat of his grandfather's. I stitched it myself, turning it into something soft, warm, protective. Every night I would wrap him in it like armor. He would snuggle into my lap and ask me to hum. Not sing, just hum. Said it made him feel like he was back in my belly, floating. He got sick often. He was always small for his age, always pale. I remember the panicked nights, rushing him to the ER in a car with no heat, praying the old tires would not slide off the icy road. I remember the way his body would burn in my arms, his little frame trembling as I soaked rags to cool his forehead. One night stands out more than the rest. He was 8. I had just started a night shift cleaning the biology lab when my neighbor called the library emergency line. "He's burning up," she said. "He's not responding." I dropped everything. I did not tell my supervisor. I did not clock out. I just ran. I drove 20 miles in a snowstorm with the windows fogging up and my heart racing like a drum. At the hospital, they rushed him in. Pneumonia. He was coughing blood. His lips were blue. I remember sitting beside that hospital bed, his tiny hand clutching my finger, tubes everywhere. The machines beeped. The nurses whispered. I was terrified. "Mama," he said, barely audible, "you're the only person I need. You're my whole world." I stayed with him all night. I did not sleep. I held his hand and hummed. I lost that job the next day. They said they understood, but rules were rules. I said thank you anyway. I never begged. It was not the last time I put him before everything else. Over the years, I missed funerals, birthdays, weddings, even my own mother's memorial, all because I could not leave him alone or afford a sitter or take the risk. I lived my life in service of his, and I never resented it, not once. Not even when my body broke down in ways I never let him see. I remember once, a coworker asked me why I never dated. I laughed. What man is going to love a woman with 3 jobs and no time to sit down? But the truth ran deeper. I was afraid. Afraid that loving someone else might take something away from my boy. Afraid that one morning he might wake up and feel replaced. So I stayed alone. On Christmas, I would give him the biggest gift and write, "From Mom and Dad." On Father's Day, I made sure he had a fun outing, even if I had to sell my own shoes to pay for it. I wanted him to feel whole, even if it meant hollowing out parts of myself. As he grew older, things got easier, financially at least. I moved to a better house, managed to buy a used car that didn't rattle. I stopped the night shifts and picked up more embroidery work. I started saving, a little at a time, not for myself, for him. College, wedding, a home one day, and he flourished. He was bright, charming, driven. He had a smile that could open any door and a voice like honey. People loved him. I loved him more, but even as he grew into a man, I still saw the boy in the blanket. Still remembered the words, "You're the only person I need." That night stayed with me, still does, because somewhere deep down, I thought if he could remember that version of himself, the scared, fevered boy who needed me, he would never let me fall, never forget, never become the kind of man who could look at his mother and see a burden, but I was wrong. Still back then, I believed. I believed in him more than I believed in God. I believed my sacrifices meant something, that the universe took notes, that love like this could not be wasted. That night in the hospital, when he was wrapped in wires and worry, I promised him, "As long as I breathe, you will never be alone," and I meant it. He was my reason, my rhythm, my everything, and I never, never thought I would become invisible to him. Not then, not after everything, but life has a way of turning full circles into sharp corners, and mine was coming. It started gradually, like frost creeping across a window. At first I barely noticed it. A small shift in tone, a missed call, a shorter hug, but over time it became a pattern too sharp to ignore. The boy who once clung to my hand with fevered fingers began pulling away, inch by inch, until there was a gap between us wide enough for a stranger to walk through. When he got his first real job, a marketing position at a tech firm in Burlington, he called me to celebrate. I was so proud I cried. He laughed, told me not to be so dramatic, and said he'd call back later. He did not. I stayed up all night baking his favorite pie, maple walnut, and ended up giving it to the mailman the next morning because it sat untouched on my counter. He started dating a woman named Hannah. Pretty, smart, polished. I met her over dinner at our home, and I wore my best dress. I remember cooking all day, pot roasts, mashed potatoes with real butter, my mother's cornbread recipe. She picked at her food, smiled politely, and later that night he said, "Maybe next time, something lighter. She's not used to, this kind of food." This kind of food. Food I used to feed him when we had nothing else. Food that kept him alive. I said nothing, just washed the dishes and hummed a little, like I used to when he was sick. The second time they visited, she brought her own salad dressing. The third time she offered to help in the kitchen and spent most of the time rearranging my spice rack, frowning at my chipped plates and asking if I had ever considered modernizing the place. I told her I liked things the way they were. She smiled and said, "Of course you do." Still, I stayed kind. I wanted to make a good impression. I wanted her to see that I was not just some dusty relic in his life. I wanted him to be proud to bring her home. But the invitations slowed. Holidays turned into text messages. Mother's Day became a card in the mail. One Thanksgiving, he said they would not make it up to Vermont because they had too many commitments in the city. I spent that day alone, eating boxed stuffing and watching reruns of holiday specials. When I finally did see him again, months later, he corrected the way I spoke in front of his colleagues. I had said, "ain't," while telling a story, and he laughed a little too loud. "Mom's old-fashioned," he said, placing a hand on my shoulder like I was a curiosity in a museum. "She's from another time." He meant it as a joke, but it felt like a goodbye. Later that evening, he pulled me aside and said, "Maybe keep the stories light, Mom. No sad stuff. Hannah says it brings down the energy." I blinked at him, confused. "You mean no stories about your childhood?" He shrugged. "Just the funny ones, the upbeat stuff." So I smiled and nodded. I became quieter, smaller. I watched my words like I was walking barefoot on broken glass. I laughed when I was supposed to. I kept my stories short. I became the kind of mother you thank in speeches but never invite to speak. His 30th birthday came around, and they threw a big party in a rented vineyard just outside Montpelier. It was beautiful, I will not lie. Strings of lights, live jazz band, cocktail bar. The whole event had the gloss of a magazine spread. I wore a deep burgundy dress I had saved for years, a classic, simple, elegant thing that made me feel almost seen. I brought him a hand-bound journal I had made myself, filled with photos and letters I had written him over the years. Memories, love, in every page. I gave it to him in private before the dinner started. He smiled politely, said thanks, Mom, and placed it on a side table without opening it. I saw Hannah glance at it with thinly veiled disinterest, then turn back to her phone. The speeches began after dessert. His coworkers spoke. His college roommate gave a long, funny toast. His boss toasted his relentless work ethic. I waited. Surely he would ask me to say something, just a few words, a memory, a thank you. But then he took the microphone and said, "Before we close the night, there's one more person I want to invite up here. Someone who has been like a second mother to me. Hannah's stepmother, Diana." "Diana?" She walked up, all elegance and pearls, and gave a polished little speech about perseverance and young love and watching this wonderful young man grow into the man he is today. I clapped, because everyone clapped. But inside, I felt something unravel. A thread pulled loose, slow and quiet. Not once did he mention me. Not once did he look my way. Afterward, people came up to congratulate him. A few smiled at me out of politeness. One woman asked if I was his aunt from the country. I said yes. It was easier that way. When the lights dimmed and the party turned to dancing, I went outside for air. I stood by the wooden railing that overlooked the vineyard and tried to breathe. The stars were out, but they looked far away. Everything did. I heard footsteps, turned to see him. "Mom," he said. "You okay?" "I'm fine," I answered, though my voice cracked a little. He sighed. "You know, I want you to know we appreciate you being here. But also try not to make things about the past. Tonight is about the future." I nodded. He looked relieved. He kissed my cheek and went back inside. I stayed out there a long time. Later, when I left, no one noticed. Again, I walked to my car with the journal still sitting on the side table behind me. They never opened it. That was the first time I realized I had raised a man who was ashamed of where he came from, who saw my love as baggage, who wanted the story of his life rewritten, cleaned up, made glossy. And to do that, he needed me gone, quiet, diminished. He did not say it, not out loud. But in that silence I heard everything. The wedding was held in a sprawling country estate 2 hours from my home. Everything about it was curated. White roses, golden candlelight, a baby grand piano in the foyer, playing itself. Even the guests looked like they had stepped out of a catalog. I arrived early, as I always do, carrying the handmade quilt I had spent the last 6 months stitching, a gift they never asked for, but I hoped they would treasure. Each square was embroidered with a memory. His first word, his favorite lullaby, his tiny footprints pressed in fabric ink. I tied it with a satin ribbon and placed it on the gift table, next to shiny boxes from upscale stores I could never afford to step into. No one greeted me at the door. I stood there for several moments before a planner in black whispered, "You must be the groom's mother?" I nodded. She scanned her clipboard and said, "Table 14, through the back, near the restrooms." Her voice was pleasant, but practiced. I walked alone. The table was tucked away, just out of view from the chandeliers and laughter. They had dressed it nicely, I will give them that. White linens, soft chairs, candles that flickered politely. But it was the location that spoke loudest. Close enough to hear the clinking glasses, far enough to be forgotten. I set down my clutch and sat quietly, smoothing the hem of my forest green dress. It was the same color as his childhood blanket. I made it myself for the occasion. Modest neckline, long sleeves, hand-stitched roses at the cuffs. I had chosen the fabric because it reminded me of him, of the woods behind our house, the stories we used to tell about tree monsters and woodland kings. I thought it might bring back a memory. But when Hannah passed by my table, she paused, turned to one of her bridesmaids and whispered, "Why does she dress like a sad poem?" They both laughed, not cruelly, just carelessly, as if I were invisible. My son heard her. He looked at me for a fleeting second and offered a tight, awkward smile. He did not say a word in my defense. I looked away. The ceremony itself was beautiful. They wrote their own vows, of course. She promised adventure, and he promised to honor the family we build together. That word, build, landed heavily, as if nothing had come before, as if everything I had done was the soil they had scraped away to make room for their foundation. The photos followed. I waited near the oak tree where they were posing, bouquet in hand, heart trembling with a hope I hated myself for still having. The photographer called out names, bride's parents, groom's colleagues, bridal party. Then, immediate family. I stepped forward, but the photographer shook his head. Just the couple's parents and siblings, please. Hannah's mother stood beside my son. Her stepfather, the same Diana who'd made the birthday speech, stood on the other side. I stood still for a moment too long, then stepped back. He did not call me in. He did not even glance my way. At dinner, no one came to my table. Plates were set in front of me by a waiter who didn't make eye contact. The filet mignon was perfectly pink, the wine perfectly chilled. I tasted none of it. I watched them dance, laugh, toast. Her father gave a speech, his best friend gave another. The room erupted in cheers. My son twirled his new wife around the floor, her white dress sweeping past marble tile. She glowed. He beamed. I clapped when others clapped. I smiled when someone passed and made eye contact. I folded my napkin into a square and placed it in my lap, then unfolded it, then folded it again. I wanted to be graceful. I wanted to disappear without making a sound. At one point, someone offered to refill my glass. "You're the groom's grandmother, right?" she asked, wine bottle in hand. I opened my mouth to correct her, but then closed it. I nodded. "Yes," I said. The night stretched on. The music got louder. The candles burned lower. And still, not once did my son come to sit with me, to check on me, to ask if I needed anything. I suppose he thought that by inviting me he had done his duty. Anything beyond that was charity. Finally, the last dance ended. The guests began to collect their coats. I stood, unsure of where to go. I had been told earlier that I could stay at the house overnight. A room had been reserved for me, they said. I walked toward the lobby, suitcase in hand, feet aching, heart heavier than I could carry. That was when Hannah's voice called out from behind me. "Oh, wait, before you head upstairs, can you take this with you?" She held out a small envelope and a set of car keys. I frowned. "What's this?" "Directions to the motel. It's just down the road. The house is full, you know, with family." I stared at her, then at the keys, then at my son, who stood a few steps behind her, hands in his pockets, saying nothing. "Motel?" I repeated. He cleared his throat. "It's just for the night, Mom. We'll figure things out later." My fingers tightened around the envelope. Inside, I could see the corner of the wedding invitation, the same one he had signed months ago in his neat handwriting. "To the woman who gave me everything. Mom, you are the pride of my life." I had framed that card, hung it in my hallway. I looked down at it now, folded and discarded like an afterthought. "I see," I said quietly. I did not argue. I did not cry. I took the keys. I walked out into the night. The cold greeted me like an old friend. The parking lot was nearly empty save for a few lingering cars. I walked slowly, deliberately, holding my coat closed against the wind. Behind me, the house lit up with laughter and music and warmth. I walked to the far corner, opened the door to my car, and sat down. Only then, in the still silence of my own solitude, did I allow myself one deep breath. It shook, but I held it in, because I would not give them that, not even now. I drove through the dark, hugging the road like it was the only thing left in the world that remembered me. The headlights carved tunnels through the trees, and the wind slipped in through the cracks in the car doors like whispers of things unsaid. My hands gripped the wheel, knuckles pale, until my own skin startled me. I had not realized how tightly I was holding on. Perhaps that was the problem all along, how tightly I had held on. By the time I reached the driveway, it was nearly midnight. The porch light was off. The house, the one I had lived in for nearly 3 decades, looked unfamiliar in the moonlight. Too clean, too quiet. The curtains were different. Hannah's choice, I was sure. Cream lace, modern and shapeless. I parked in my usual spot, stepped out of the car, and retrieved my overnight bag from the back seat. I walked up the path slowly, my breath fogging the air, my feet crunching over gravel that I had shoveled myself year after year. My hand reached for the front door handle without thinking. It did not turn. I tried again. Nothing. I looked closer. The lock had been changed. At first I thought I had made a mistake. Wrong key? Wrong door? But no, this was my house. The maple tree out front, the chipped brick step, the creak in the railing. This was my house. I knocked. Softly at first, then louder. No answer. I walked around to the side entrance and knocked again. Still nothing. Finally, the porch light flicked on. A man in a black security uniform stepped outside, holding a clipboard. "Can I help you, ma'am?" he asked. I frowned. "Yes, I live here. I just got back from the wedding. My son—" The man cut me off. "I'm going to need to see some ID." I reached into my bag, hands trembling, and pulled out my driver's license. He looked it over, then shook his head. "I'm sorry, but you're not listed on the residency file. I was told not to allow entry without prior clearance." I stared at him, unblinking. "This is my house." "I'm sorry, ma'am." "I paid for this roof," I whispered. "I scrubbed these floors, repaired that fence, planted every hydrangea in that yard. My son grew up in that bedroom. I still have his height chart marked on the doorframe in the hallway." The man looked uncomfortable. "I'm just doing my job." I stepped back. Slowly. I felt the weight of my bag in my hand, heavier than before. The cold pierced through my coat and settled into my bones. I sat down on the porch steps, the same ones where I used to sit and read while he played in the yard. I could still see him there, running barefoot through the grass, yelling, "Watch me, mama!" as he leapt over dandelions like they were hurdles in the Olympics. I could see his scraped knees, his crooked smile, the way he used to hug me so tightly it took my breath away. And now I was a trespasser. I pulled my phone from my pocket and called him. It rang twice before he picked up. "Mom?" His voice was tight, tired. "I'm at the house," I said. "The key doesn't work." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I know." I swallowed. "The security guard says I'm not on the residency list." Another pause. Then he said, "Mom, it's not your home anymore. Please don't make this harder." I didn't respond. "I mean, we talked about this," he continued. "You said you were thinking of downsizing, starting fresh." "I never said I would be locked out," I whispered. "We just thought it would be smoother this way, less emotional for everyone." I hung up without another word. I sat there until my phone died, until my feet went numb, until the sun started to rise behind the trees, casting pale gold across the yard I once called mine. I looked at the windows again. I could see the edge of the new curtains, the shadow of a vase I did not recognize on the windowsill. Nothing in there belonged to me anymore. Not the walls, not the silence. And still, I did not cry. Not until a squirrel scurried across the porch and knocked over the potted plant I had given them last Christmas. The ceramic cracked in half, and the dirt spilled across the step beside me. That was when it hit me. Not the insult, not the betrayal, not even the rejection. It was the finality. I had nowhere else to go, no one waiting, nothing to return to. And for the first time in years, I let out a sound that was not words, not reason, not held back. I wept. I wept for the girl I had been, who once believed love guaranteed loyalty. I wept for the woman I became, who gave everything and asked for nothing. And I wept for the mother I still was, who finally understood that even love, deep, true sacrificial love, could be turned away at the door. But as the sobs faded, I felt something else take its place. Stillness. Not peace, not yet, but stillness. Because in that moment, I realized the one thing no one could take from me, not with a changed lock or a cruel sentence or a missing name on a form. They could take my home, but they could not take my memory of building it, of surviving in it, of protecting it. And they could not take the truth. I had nothing left to lose, and nothing left to fear. After that night on the porch, something inside me changed. Not overnight, not with rage or resentment, but slowly, like ice melting in spring. I stopped waiting for explanations. I stopped begging memory to make sense of cruelty, and I started looking for paper, real paper. I pulled out the fireproof box I kept under my bed. Inside were folders, labeled with years, bound with rubber bands and care. Deeds, receipts, letters, tax returns from decades ago. I had kept everything, not because I distrusted my son, but because I trusted myself to never forget where I came from. I found the contact card for Mary Ellen Sampson, the lawyer who had helped me buy the house 28 years ago. A firm but kind woman, sharp as glass, now semi-retired but still taking clients she cared about. I called her. She remembered me immediately. "Oh, honey," she said after I told her why I was calling. "Come in tomorrow. Bring everything." I did. She laid everything out in neat stacks, glasses low on her nose, reading each line like scripture. "You never transferred full ownership," she said after 30 minutes. I blinked. "What? You put your son on the documents so he could qualify for a business loan, but the original deed still lists you as the primary owner." I stared at the paper like it had turned into a miracle. "So legally, he cannot sell it, he cannot rent it, he cannot even change the locks without your written permission." "He already did." She smiled, a slow, cold thing. "Then it is time to take it back." I nodded, and for the first time in months, I felt the ground under my feet again. We filed the documents, quietly. I did not want a fight. I wanted freedom. I updated every account, reclaimed every legal thread, rerouted every tie that had once held me down, and then I did something my son never saw coming. I rewrote my will. I gave it all to Ellie. You remember her, the girl from the library, the one who clung to books like they were lifelines and cried when the fiction section closed early. I used to tutor her after school, gave her sandwiches she never asked for, gloves she always returned, and once a ride home when I found her crying in the snow. I never had to ask what her home life was like. Her silence told me everything. Now she was grown, 24, studying social work, dreaming of building a place for kids like her, kids who had no voice, no safety, no mother waiting in a warm kitchen. I called her and asked her to meet me. She came with a knitted hat and a hug that made my ribs ache. I told her my story, not the whole thing, just enough. Then I handed her the new will. She cried, tried to refuse. I insisted. "This is not charity," I said. "This is justice." She promised to turn the property into a shelter and school within 5 years. I believed her, because I had seen her survive, and because I had nothing left to prove to the people who had taken me for granted. A week later, I went to Mary Ellen's office and signed the final transfer documents. Pen to paper, decision made, no turning back. I walked out of that office lighter than I had been in years, and then my phone rang. It was my son. His voice was softer than I remembered. "Hey, Mom, got a minute?" I said nothing. I've been thinking about everything, about how things ended. It's been hard. Work's been unstable. We're trying to refinance the house, but, well, your name's still on it. I didn't realize that until yesterday. I let the silence stretch. He coughed. "I guess I wanted to ask if we could start fresh. Maybe talk, maybe fix things." "I already signed," I said. He paused. "What?" "I already transferred everything. It is no longer yours to fix." Another silence. "Who'd you give it to?" "Someone who remembers what love feels like when it costs something." He inhaled sharply. "Mom, I'm sorry. I know." And I hung up. Not in anger, but in peace. He had called too late. The ink was already dry. News travels fast in a small town, faster still when it smells like scandal and stings like betrayal. It was a neighbor who told me first, breathless and whispering like she was delivering news of a death. "You should see the paper," she said, folding it 3 times before handing it to me like it was something dangerous. Front page, local tech consultant under investigation for alleged financial misconduct involving mother's estate. Right below the headline was a grainy photo of my son, my baby, with his mouth tight and eyes lowered, stepping out of a courthouse in a suit that no longer fit quite right. The article detailed claims that he had attempted to access and redirect funds from a private account belonging to his elderly mother, me, while she was hospitalized and mentally compromised. Except I was not hospitalized, and I was not mentally compromised. I was just tired. Tired of being erased. Tired of being underestimated. Tired of being the footnote in a story I helped write. They had not counted on me staying quiet forever. After the wedding, after the porch, after the motel, I went home. Not to the house he had locked me out of, but to the little cottage I used to rent before I bought that place. It was still owned by the same woman, a friend of mine, and she let me move back in with no questions, no judgment, just keys and clean sheets. There I began to take stock. I went through my papers, my accounts, everything I had spent decades building and saving and sacrificing for. And I realized how close I had come to losing it all. I had let love blind me to logistics. I had let loyalty keep me from legal clarity. But not anymore. I hired a lawyer, a quiet, meticulous woman with a silver bob and a mind like steel. She helped me file the proper documents. She uncovered requests I had never seen, documents submitted under my name that I had not signed, requests for power of attorney, medical releases, even a transfer of ownership on the house I had bought with my own money. He had tried to erase me with paperwork, but he had underestimated the paper trail I kept. What followed was a slow, deliberate unraveling. Letters from the bank, court dates, depositions. I answered every question with calm truth. I showed every receipt. I opened every file I had stored in shoeboxes under my bed. I remembered every date, every detail. I knew my story because I had lived it, every hour, every scar. The court did not take long to respond. He was charged with attempted fraud, misrepresentation, elder exploitation. I watched the hearing from the back row. He did not look for me. He could not meet my eyes. Hannah sat beside him for the first few hearings. Then one day she was not there. I heard whispers in the hallway, how she had moved out, told friends she could not stay with someone who tried to cheat his own mother. Someone said she left a note. I never saw it. I never asked for it. The night after his arraignment, I received a letter in the mail. Handwritten, from him. It was not long, just a few lines. Mom, I do not know where to begin. I do not expect you to forgive me. I just want you to know I was scared. Scared of not having enough. Scared of failing, scared of being less than you thought I'd be. I thought I could fix things before you found out. I was wrong, about everything. I am sorry. Your son? I read it once. Then I folded it and placed it in the back of the same box that held the hospital bill from when he was 8 and the Valentine's Day card he made for me in 2nd grade. It belonged there, in the space where memory meets mourning. But I did not write back. I had no more words to offer him. No more apologies to make for his choices, no more pieces of myself to give away like hand-me-downs. What hurt most was not the crime, not the deception. It was the knowledge that when he thought I was weakest, when he believed I could no longer defend myself, he had not protected me. He had planned to take, to steal, to sign my name as if it were a thing to be used, and that kind of betrayal is not something you patch up with a letter and a stamp. Still, I did not wish him harm. I did not pray for revenge. I simply let the truth breathe. And the truth did what truth always does when left to itself. It found the cracks, and it bloomed. The town turned quiet around me. People I had not seen in years dropped off casseroles and flowers. Some said nothing. Some just sat on the porch and held my hand. Some looked at me like I had risen from a grave they did not know they had buried me in. One woman, a former student of mine, knocked on my door with tears in her eyes. I read about everything, she said. I just wanted to say, I remember what you did for me. When my dad walked out, you stayed after school every day for a month to help me catch up on homework. You gave me your gloves when I lost mine. I never forgot, and I never will. I hugged her. That meant more to me than the verdict, more than the apology, more than any inheritance or courtroom win. Because in that moment, I was not the mother who had been betrayed. I was the woman who had mattered, who had left something behind other than hurt. And that was enough. I still live in that little cottage. I grow tomatoes in the summer and watch the snow fall in the winter. I write letters I never send. I drink tea from the same chipped cup he gave me for Mother's Day when he was 13. It says "Best Mom Ever" in faded blue letters. I keep it not because I believe it now, but because I did then. And that version of him, the boy who meant it, is still someone I can love. The man he became? That is between him and the mirror. But I am done carrying his reflection in my hands. He chose his path, and I chose mine. And when our stories are finally written down, mine will not end with what he took from me. It will end with what I refuse to give away: dignity, memory, and the quiet kind of strength that does not need to be loud to be unforgettable. It arrived on a Thursday morning, tucked in brown paper and sealed with pink string. No return address. Just my name, written carefully in blue ink, the kind only school children still use. I recognized the handwriting instantly. Round, patient, hopeful. The same hand that used to write me thank you cards every year after Christmas, long after she no longer had to. Inside was a painting. A small canvas no more than a foot wide, but it stopped me in my tracks. 2 wrinkled hands cradling a tiny red heart. No background, no distractions, just the hands and the heart between them, floating in space like a truth no one dared say aloud. There was a thank you for giving me a home before I had a name, for seeing me when I was invisible, for teaching me that love can come from a stranger and still be real. I hope this finds you well. With all my love, Ellie. Ellie, the girl I used to tutor for free at the library after school, the one who was always hungry but too proud to ask for food, the one who hugged me too tightly on holidays and never mentioned her parents, the one I left everything to in my will, not out of bitterness, but because I wanted the things I built to go to someone who knew the value of something given with nothing expected in return. I held the painting to my chest for a long while. Then I stood, walked to the center of my small living room, and cleared a space on the wall. I hung it there, right above the mantel where an old clock used to tick before its gears gave out. Now, in its place, the painting stood, a silent testament to a kind of love that does not fade, does not betray, does not ask to be earned. I sat back on my couch, tea cooling beside me, and just looked at it. It was not revenge I felt. It was restoration. I had lost a son, not by death but by choice, his. But in the quiet ruins of that loss I had found myself, my voice, my strength, my truth, and I had found others too. Ellie, my old neighbor who brought me soup on snow days, the librarian who still calls to check on me, the nurse at the clinic who calls me Mama G and winks when I walk in. They are my family now, not by blood, but by heart. I spent so many years thinking love meant sacrifice, that to be a mother was to give until you were empty and pray they remembered to say thank you. But love, real love, does not ask you to disappear. It sees you. It holds you gently. It never turns the lock on the door you built. So I will keep sitting here with this little painting and my chipped teacup and the sound of wind brushing against the windows. I will grow my tomatoes. I will read my books. I will light a candle at dusk and whisper thank you to the girl who remembered me. And I will not wait for anyone's apology. I have nothing left to prove. To anyone. Only this. I was a good mother. I am a better woman. And I have made peace with the past, not by pretending it did not hurt, but by surviving it. So to anyone listening, anyone who knows what it feels like to be forgotten by the very people you raised, to be dismissed, betrayed, replaced, let me leave you with this. Revenge has no expiration date. But sometimes, the sweetest form of revenge is not what you take back. It is what you build after they are gone. Sometimes, forgiveness given quietly to yourself and no one else is the warmest way to win. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. If this story touched something in you, if you've ever been overlooked, cast aside, or told you were too old to matter, know this: you are not alone. Here, your pain is remembered, your strength is honored, and your voice will never be silenced again. This is Grandma, True Stories, where silence becomes strength and memory becomes justice. If you believe in stories that don't need to scream to be powerful, if you believe that quiet women carry the loudest truths, then subscribe to this channel. Turn on the bell so you never miss a story that reminds you just how much one heart can hold. Because revenge has no expiration date, and when a grandma speaks, the world finally listens. Subscribe now to Grandma True Stories. Your seat at the table is waiting.